Hello, everyone. My name is actually Dimitrios Beis, and yes, I am the Mayor of Pierrefonds-Roxboro, and you heard some of the other titles that I've held in the past. I've been elected for 16 years. This is my 16th year that I'm elected, and I spent 25 years before that in the capacities that was mentioned earlier. My entire adult life has been devoted to community. And even before that, as a youngster, I was somehow always engaged and involved in different ways, of which I will talk to you about today. Titles mean nothing, have meant nothing for me, will mean nothing for me in the future, because the difference we make in society is the type of action we put into place to not only engage our communities, because at the root level, is what creates strong and builds strong communities. And this is what I found in my life. I have to go back in history a little bit because it'll give you perspective. I'm honored and privileged to be here. Very difficult for me to stay on this dot, but I will do the best I can. What I'm saying is that the idea and the perspective I have in civil engagement, civic engagement, and building strong communities, hopefully you'll understand in my past and reflect on your own to be able to do the same in the respective communities that you come from. Pierrefonds-Roxboro is the largest community on the West Island. We also have the most culturally diverse. We count 60 to 70 cultural communities. And if I took a poll in this room, it would be very difficult to name 60 or 70 countries. And we have folks in our community that live in perfect harmony. We also have social issues that we deal with in our community. I was one of those children. We were one of those immigrant families that lived in these areas that saw the fork in the road, and thankfully I was guided to take the right path and lead me to where I am today. And I don't say this for pity, I say it because we all come from all walks of life that lead us to the destiny that we hold today. When we came, I was born here to immigrant Greek parents. My parents didn't find things here in Canada the way they expected. We moved back to Greece, my older brother and my parents and I, and funny enough, my parents didn't find Greece the way it was 15 to 20 years before that, and what happened? They ended up coming back. Imagine the difficult decision they had to come back. And the reason I bring that up is because the last thing on my parents' mind, let alone us, we were so young. I was 5 in 1970 when we came. Imagine to Pierrefonds, where I am now the mayor of that community. We came to this community where civic engagement and building stronger communities didn't exist. The notion and the idea of what civic engagement was at that time didn't even exist. And if my parents were alive today and you asked them then, like you would ask them now, would have no idea what that meant. But what I did know was that at that time, an immigrant woman who spoke very broken English, that never worked outside of the home, was able to assemble all the youth in the community, where all my vivid memories of that age were of playing in front of the home where we lived, in the yard, and when it rained, I remember my mother opening the garage and the kids were all congregating there. The beauty about that was the neighboring community and the parents knew that their children were there and were happy that they were there because they were in a secure space. So later on in life, I realized that in her own way, not even knowing, that was civic engagement. That was being part of a community and building stronger bonds with the neighborhood and the street that she lived on. And for me, as I got involved in every sport growing up and being asked to volunteer, who knew what volunteer, who even knew the word? I didn't know the word, I was just asked to help. And what did I do? I went and helped. And I continued to do this until I coached and did other things in the community and got involved. It was only when I started working for the city in my early 20s and I bought my first home around the same time that I realized what civic engagement was and how we built strong communities. And how I did that was I owned a home that was the last one on the street that had a row of duplexes and triplexes on that same stretch. So what I saw was always a mess in the backyards, always, almost hoarding in the back properties that I would see from my yard but wouldn't be visible from the street. So what did I do to be civically engaged? I attended one of the council meetings where I voiced some of these concerns with like-minded people that were sitting in the audience, listening to some of these comments, being constructive and trying to find solutions. Soon enough, I discovered that just me being there engaged found some resolve to what I was dealing with, where it was corrected soon after. And the comment that I got at that time by the elected body and people that I got to know later on in life was, how would they have ever known if nothing was visible from the street? And unless people really brought that to their attention so that they can dispatch their teams to deal with it. So that was my first almost textbook description of what I believed civic duty to be. And of course, that moved forward into my professional life where I was able to engage like-minded people in the community. And I used to tell them that notion of, why should I do anything to be involved in a community? It's not going to change anything. That was the furthest from the truth, the way I knew it. And so for me, my message had always been, well, you have to put people around you that you trust and believe. If we look at what community building and positive community growth is all about, what is it really? It's empathy, it's sympathy, it's listening, it's dialogue, constructive criticism. It's all of these factors that come into play that sometimes we neglect. And when you look at today's society, we can hold a TEDx talk on social media. We can have a whole night, and that wouldn't be enough to talk about what social media has done to today's society. What it's done for civic engagement and positive community building is, I believe, in many ways, it's worked against it. Because when you look at what I do and the type of information that we're fed through social media, how easy is it for someone behind a keyboard to write something that is full of misinformation, because at that moment they're emotional to be able to write something that affects their little world, and they are so concerned with it that they write it on social media. My reaction to that is, how much easier would it be to contact your officials in any sphere of society and have them engage to find a solution? But what happens is, oftentimes, they feel sort of secure to be able to write something. And although that might be very important to the people that write it initially, it's not the right way necessarily to go about it. But the worst part of that is the thread that follows. And the thread that follows often is full of folks that probably have never experienced the type of comment that you see, probably don't even live in the area, but find it upon themselves and necessary to comment on some of these misinformation type comments, that it becomes even worse. So you ask yourself, what is civic engagement and how do we build strong communities? That is the opposite of what we strive to do in community life. When you're involved in every sphere of society, then you need to absolutely take notice to that. And so this is why, for me, it's very difficult to read these types of comments on the rare occasion that we hear them and read them, because they're the furthest from what we want our communities to be engaged with. So I'll go even further, and the reason I brought up my mother. And the older you get, I don't know about any of you, but I bring up my mother, the older I get, that people roll their eyes after a while. But there were a lot of things that we learned back in those years from a generation that paved those roads ahead of us. And my mother, for example, when you look at the things that she did in the past, the way I look at positive community growth and the way I look at civic engagement that is constructive and makes sense in a community, you don't have to know me by name. You just have to know the structure that's in place. And you need to know that everyone has a voice, particularly today when you have officials, for example, that are available 24/7. Back in the day, we used to see an elected official at a city council meeting if we chose to go, but we were so busy trying to make ends meet, having a job, buying a home, providing for your family, that the last thing on your mind is civic engagement and getting involved in a community. So now we have all the tools in place and all the people in place to be able to do that. And they choose, folks, a lot of them, not to go that route. And when I look back at the beginning, infancy stages of what I discovered later on was actually civic engagement. And I'm going to ask you here in this room. You don't need to answer it now, but it's a point of reflection. And the reflection that I always tell people is, what do you think civic and public growth of a community is? When how many of us, and I would guess probably very few, can name more than 5 people that live on our street, next to us, in front of us, in our neighborhood, that have had constructive conversations of like-minded issues that we can address and talk about with our city officials, for example? Probably a few of us. Probably, and I speak for myself as well. So when I go back all those years, 55 years ago, when my mother was able to assemble people in the neighborhood and know them by name, not only the children, but the parents as well. What's happened in all these years that we're not able to do that? So community starts, civic engagement starts, positive strengthening of communities start for sure at home. Because it's what we teach those of us who have kids, our partners, those of us who have partners, how we raise our family to be involved in the community. That's the first step. The second step is for sure our streets and our neighbors and the relationships we develop with everyone to be able to, once there's an issue, and we lived it in Pierrefonds with all the floods. Boy, I can tell you how resilient we were and how people came together at a moment's notice. People really got to know each other fast, and since then have created those bonds to this day that have stayed connected. We don't need a crisis, though. And then once you do that on your street, you're able to do that in your neighborhood, in your community, have the link with the decision makers and the leaders to be able to go forward. That's the way I see it, and that's the way I've learned. And the other thing that I will ask you, well, I'll make you think about. We always say that we don't have time. We can't get involved. We can't sit on organizations. Our time is too precious. When we know, and I tell you this with utmost confidence, what I hear more often than not is people would much rather pay for a service than give their time. That was unheard of before. First of all, no one had any money. What would my mother give to someone to have a service? She would give her time. Today, folks would much rather give money and pay for a service than give their time. Think about that. Let that sink in. When the cornerstone of communities was built on volunteering and people being engaged. And now we're finding that the same core group of people are being involved in many different organizations, and that is thinning out the volunteer base, where some of those folks are getting older, they're getting tired, and they're almost stepping back, and then there isn't any relief for them as they go forward. So that's one of the challenges we have. But many people realistically and truly don't have time. They have children, they work 2 jobs, they're caught in traffic 2 hours a day, I get it. But there are some that do have time. And all of us can pull out our electronic devices and we can see at a moment's notice how much time, maybe not waste, that's not the right, maybe it is the right word, how much time we waste on these devices that could be used, a fraction of that, to give back to community. Because not only will the community thank you, but it'll give something to us in our souls that we will contribute and be a part of the better good, the greater good. That's what I've always learned in my life. And I believe that everyone has the capacity to do that. No one needs to grab somebody by the hand to drag them in, but if needed, there are leaders in the community that can do it. I'm very fortunate, folks, to be the mayor of a community that has resilience, that has like-minded people, that have a lot of folks here from different organizations that are here. I'm so proud to be the mayor of that community. And for whatever it's worth, we all hold a legacy in our life. When it ends, people will not remember how much we have or what we did. They will remember the community that we were involved in. And the West Island and in Pierrefonds-Roxboro, I can tell you we have a strong community. I wish for those that have never been there to come and be a part of it. And I will end with this. And many people that are in the room that know me, I talk about mirrors a lot. symbolically, I have one in my pocket every moment of my life. And that mirror is the first thing to come out before I make a decision and say to myself, what am I doing to better not only my home, but my community and the people that live in it? Not because of a title I hold, because the title means nothing after I'm gone. It's what will I do in my community to make it a better place for me, my family, and everybody in it. On that, folks, I leave you with that message. An honor and a privilege to be here in front of you. If my name was Ted, it would even be more cool. But it's not. It's Dimitrios. So thank you very much, folks. Have a pleasant evening and safe drive home. Take care.